stat number 10. What if the Fantastic Four had not gained their superpowers? Okay, the Fantastic Four, the FF, they got their powers when they were on a space mission, and all of a sudden cosmic radiation entered the chat. Powers were given to them all at the same time, each obtaining a hint of the elements. But what if this space mission didn't go south? What if that cosmic storm didn't get past the spaceship's shielding? Well, afterwards, the Rocket Group, that's what they're called after, becomes the highest ranking space industry, so even without powers, they're still awesome. But when Mole Man's monsters come along to attack, the team still comes out on top because science always wins. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be so great. It helps the channel out a lot. Or if you want to hit subscribe, our faces will pop up on your feed. How lovely is that? Number 9. What if Spider-Man had rescued Gwen Stacy? Yes, okay, I remember sitting in the theater watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is so underrated as a movie. Side note, it gets way too much for some reason. But when Gwen was falling in the clock tower, I held my breath. I knew what was gonna happen, and to this day, it's one of the saddest scenes in a comic book film. So this what if certainly helped ease that pain. Issue 24 shows us a world where he caught Gwen, and after that, it's beautiful. He proposes, he reveals his identity to her, and on top of that, Harry and Norman reunite. They work it out. All of the wins, look at this. And then when Peter and Gwen do get married at the ceremony, they're doing the cha-cha slide, which I personally love doing. But then J. Jonah Jameson bursts in with a bunch of police officers with footage that reveals Peter Parker as Spider-Man. So at this point, Peter was forced to run for the rest of his life to protect the ones that he loved. I had you in the first half. I know I did. These what ifs are mostly sad. Number 8. What if the Phoenix had not died? Issue 27 of What If again shows us a brighter future. Well, at least it starts that way. In this alternate reality, Jean didn't die. She was actually reborn again, and then when the X-Men have to take on Galactus and Terrax in the Shi'ar Galaxy, she uses that Phoenix Force to get the job done. She puts an end to Galactus, which sounds great on paper, but the Phoenix Force starts to amplify and get a little bit more and more out of control. So she accidentally destroyed a small star and other asteroids, and when she returns to the X-Mansion, she's now in hot water for destroying yet another star. Shadowcat is not pleased, so Jean turns into the Dark Phoenix and takes out Shadowcat, and Polaris, and Cyclops, and also planet Earth, and then shortly after consumes the universe. That escalated quickly, wow.
Number 10. Ice Giant Thor. A perfect what if tale. It's almost surprising it wasn't done before this point. In What If Thor in 2018, we get the story of what if Thor was raised by frost giants. Laufey, the king of the frost giants, defeats Odin in their battle so long ago. And just as Odin took the infant Loki, Laufey takes the kid Thor and raises him as his own. Loki is obviously here too, and like usual, they form a pretty tight bond as adopted brothers. Unfortunately, due to Thor's strength and skill in battle, not to mention his fondness for summoning the power of lightning, he is praised among the frost giants and by Laufey himself, who begins to completely forget Loki, his actual true son. Instead, Loki finds the captured Freya in the dungeons, and she teaches him how to use magic. Loki eventually busts her out of prison, and together they attempt to escape to Midgard. They go to the ruins of Asgard and attempt to repair the Rainbow Bridge, until Thor and Laufey show up. Loki ends the life of his father, while Thor unknowingly ends his mother with a blast from his giant ice hammer, Ice Crusher. Thor almost takes out his brother as well, but at the last minute, he lets him go. We don't know what happens next, only that Loki went to Midgard, had kids and a family, and apparently became a hero. It ends on a rather sweet note though. Number 9. Man-Spider. Okay, so in this story, everything that happens to Spider-Man is exactly the same. Oh, sorry, I left out the extremely important detail that in What If number 8 in 1978, this isn't Peter Parker, it's Webster Weaver, an anthropomorphized spider in a world of other animal people. Oh yes, and he gets bit by a radioactive human, giving this spider the proportional powers of a human. Apart from that, and the villains being hilarious alternate versions like Marvin the Hunter, Culture Vulture, Rude Rhino, the Green Gobbler, King Pig, Octodoctopus, and Leaping Lizard, everything is just the same as it always is. Until one day, Ray's the Bug Spray Baron threatened to destroy the ozone unless he was given $1 trillion. Turns out Ray's is the guy who defeated Webster's Uncle Ben. Uncle Bug. Man-Spider saves the day, Ray's is destroyed, and he swings back home to Aunt Mayfly. Okay, yes, it's totally different, but a lot of story beats are still the same, so there's that. Number 8. Mustang. What if 114 posed us the question, What if heroes didn't leave the battle world? The answer? They make babies! While there are a few super kids in this story, the one I found to be the strangest was Mustang. Mustang is Clint Barton Jr., and I bet you'll never guess who his father is. His mother, on the other hand, again not surprising if you just look at him, is Jennifer Walters, the She-Hulk. So, with these two avenging parents, that leaves Mustang with a super strength that isn't quite on She-Hulk's level, and an affinity for using bows. I'm sorry, it's just an odd combo to me. He's a bit taller than almost everyone else too, which makes sense. So I'm guessing this gives him the ability to use bigger bows with much higher tensile strength? So he can shoot bigger arrows? He can fire them much faster? Look, I'm not saying these powers aren't helpful or cool. I mean, super strength is a classic. They're just odd when they're put together. Also, why Mustang? Number 7. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. What if Volume 2, number 24 takes the story of Uncanny X-Men number 159, in which Dracula has drunk just enough from Storm to gain control of her mind, but instead, in What If, he drinks enough to completely turn her into a member of the undead. As an evil, unstoppable vampire, Storm turns all the other X-Men into vampires as well, but thanks to Wolverine's healing factor and berserker powers, he is able to resist the complete mind control of Dracula and beheads the Vampire King. Now, after either turning or delifing almost all the other heroes and having the US turned into a quarantine zone, the only hero left to stop Wolverine, Vampire Lord, has found his perfect vessel after traveling the astral plane. Doctor Strange's spirit and Frank Castle, the Punisher, sort of merged together, and being the most accomplished vampire hunter, Frank dispatches quite a few vamps before Kitty Pryde attempts to split the two before being separated from her head. This, of all things, snaps Wolverine out of it, and he gets to the Darkhold and destroys himself and every single other vampire. Wow, what a roller coaster of emotion.
Number 10. What if the X-Men had lost Inferno? This very chaotic and fire-filled demon horde-infested story comes to us from What If Volume 2, issue number 6. And we are starting it off hot, friends. This is quite a dark story. Here we get to imagine what the fate of the world would have been like had the X-Men failed in defeating Madeline Pryor during the events of Inferno. Instead, she and Sim take over the planet Earth, unleashing hordes of demons on it and ruling it together. However, the heroes who have survived their reign of terror manage to band together and, using their power, fight back. In the end, they do win the day, but not without casualties. Wolverine himself in the story ends up becoming the pet of the Goblin Queen, and Sim fully giving in to his feral rage and feeding on the innocent. Ooh. He only becomes free from the fog of his rage after he kills Kitty Pryde tragically and realizes the monster that he has become. Number 9. What if Captain America were revived today? 1983. Because there's another one of these from I think 1994, so yeah, but that's in volume 2. We're going to volume 1. There are actually a few different stories involving Captain America being revived in the modern day or simply evolving with time as it passed. So 1994, and I think there's also another one of them which might even be on this list. But in this What If from volume 1, issue 44, we get a darker take on what a modern day Cap could look like in the 80s. This version of the hero ends up turning America into a heavily monitored and policed country during his witch hunt for communists. Fortunately, as dark as that all is, we learn that this isn't the real Captain America but an imposter that took his place after he went MIA. The real Cap returns and battles it out with imposter Cap, but in the end, the real Captain America turns to the people of America to undo all the damage done. He asks them to take responsibility, as while they were led to this point by a false version of him, they also allowed themselves to be led falsely. It's honestly a really good speech that even today rings true in a lot of ways, at least for me, and it provides the silver lining and shining hope for an otherwise pretty dark tale. Little grains of hope, that's all we need. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more What If lists, be sure to let us know by giving this a thumbs up, sharing it, doing all the things. Also, if you want more What If content, we do have a playlist now for that. Yay! Number 8. What if Wolverine killed the Hulk? In issue 31 of the 1977 What If series, we find out what would happen if instead, when Wolverine first met the Hulk, he had killed him. Wolverine goes on to celebrate his victory against the big green Goliath after killing him, having some drinks and throwing some punches like he usually does at the local tavern. However, in the end, things get out of hand and he accidentally kills one of the patrons in a rage. When he seeks help from the military to protect and defend him, they actually turn their back on Wolverine, and so he ends up joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He becomes a sleeper agent for Magneto, infiltrating the X-Men. However, when Magneto finally plans on enacting his plan to defeat and capture the X-Men, Wolverine has a change of heart, feeling as though he has truly found acceptance and a family with the mutant team of heroes. He battles Magneto one-on-one and the two kill one another in the end. It's a pretty tragic tale. Basically all what ifs with Wolverine I feel like are usually pretty sad. Pretty sad or pretty dark. Number 7. What if Captain America had not vanished during World War II? See, another Captain America story because I love these. This story comes to us from issue 5 of volume 1, aka the 1977 What If series. While Captain America does not get trapped in the ice and Bucky never goes missing, presumed dead, only to become brainwashed and repurposed by the Soviet Union as the Winter Soldier, a worse fate seemingly awaits both of these heroes. Neither having ever disappeared, Steve goes on to fight as Captain America until he eventually retires from the mantle, becoming instead the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Bucky ends up taking his place, becoming the new Cap, as we have also seen happen in modern comics, and Rick Jones ends up becoming Buck's new sidekick, also going by the mantle of Bucky. Because I guess Rick or Ricky just doesn't have the same zing to it? Sadly though, Cap Bucky ends up dying on a mission, and Sharon Carter, Agent 13, who had hoped to settle down with Bucky after his final mission, blames Steve for his death. She actually accuses him of robbing him of his childhood and putting him in danger. Pretty intense. And then of course it ends with Rick volunteering to become the new Cap, so the deadly cycle it seems is destined to still continue in this timeline. You'd feel like after that all happened, Steve might be like, maybe we won't do that again, it didn't go great the last time. But he's just like, ah yes, Rick Jones, now you will be Captain America and probably die. What if the Green Goblin stole the Infinity Gauntlet? This story comes to us from the What If Infinity Dark Reign one-shot. Here we see Green Goblin dealing with a lot of family drama and trauma from his past. He steals the Infinity Gauntlet and not only uses it to defeat, well, all the heroes of planet Earth and beyond, but it's also revealed that his true motivation for doing all of this and pretty much everything that he's done is to win his father's approval. His father, who was always so unimpressed and who for a long time mistreated him, pushing Norman towards greatness or else. When Norman showcases his villainous accomplishments, it only causes his father to revile him even more though. Norman then decides to use his Infinity Gauntlet to snap and influence his father, making him proud of him instead. But this makes his father's love and approval feel pretty empty, especially when Norman learns that his altered dad actually really only loves him just because he's his son, and not for all that he has accomplished. Which you would think would be really nice, but to Norman he's like, that's infuriating, I hate that. Norman erases his father from existence, and in so doing, erases himself. Don't you hate when that happens? Number 5. Marvel Zombies Resurrection. While not an exact what if series, Marvel Zombies Resurrection definitely feels like a what if version of the Marvel Zombies world that imagines a completely new scenario involving zombies based on established Marvel lore, where Galactus becomes infected with a mysterious new virus that it turns out was created by the Brood, dun dun dun, to infect people more efficiently, turning them instead into zombies. The whole series from 2020 and the intro to it from 2019 that kind of explains all of the lore that you need to know to jump in is all pretty bleak, with only a few people on Earth making it out alive in the end, and still fighting basically just to survive after the world has pretty much been completely infected after Galactus' corpse is hurled to the Earth to be used as a kind of zombie creating bomb. But while the story is pretty dark in terms of all the great heroes that we lose, do not worry, at least Carol's Flurkin cat Chewie stays safe. Thank goodness. In case like me you read this and you were worried the whole time about that little fur baby, I was like, no, please don't let Chewie die, Chewie's so cute. Chewie is also a badass, so really there's no need to worry. Chewie's like one of the best fighters in this entire series, which I love. Number 4. What if Clint Barton killed Norman Osborn during Dark Reign? This what if comes answered in the What If Dark Reign one-shot. Here we get to see what could have happened had Clint Barton's plan to kill Norman Osborn actually come together. Clint himself ends up making a martyr out of Osborn though, unfortunately, and becomes a wanted man in the process. One civilian decides to take the matter of justice into his own hands, calling out the assassin, Clint Francis Barton. And if he doesn't show himself, he threatens to blow up the entire Sunday Inn and all the innocent people that are inside it. Hawkeye does show up though and attempts to talk the man down, but surprisingly, the man pulls a gun and shoots Clint point blank to death rather than surrender. He is taken away, and in the end, Hammer remains in control under Deputy Director, likely now full director actually, Victoria Hand. Basically, if Hawkeye had actually killed Norman Osborn, it would be bad, I think, in the long run. I think that's what we learned. Number 3. What if the Kingdom of Kane? In What If issue 94 out of the 1989 series, also known as Volume 2, we get to visit a world destroyed by the Sentinels. Oh goody. The Sentinels did not only take out all of mutant kind supposedly, but also killed all of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, and its general population of non-powered individuals who were killed by high levels of radiation that the Sentinels emitted. The only one to survive all this destruction is Juggernaut, who wanders the Earth for years reminiscing on his past and all of his wrongdoings, and feeling unbearably lonely all the while. Poor Juggernaut. Magneto shows up and confirms that everything that has come to pass is Juggernaut's fault because he killed Professor X, which was basically the catalyst event for this chain reaction of destruction that has now come to pass. Juggernaut finds and kind of falls into a secret bunker as a result of his fight with Magneto, where he learns that some mutants survived and are actually hiding out. Yay! When they ask him to leave them be though, he refuses, only to learn that this was an attempt to protect themselves against the radiation, which he is now let in by breaking into the bunker, infecting them and ultimately sentencing them to death. So, it's really sad. Juggernaut's like, I'm lonely, I just want to like talk to you. And they're just like, you just killed us, so thanks for that. He's like, wow. I ruin everything, this is terrible. Number 2. What If the Traitor? In this alternate tale that comes to us from the 1989 volume of What If issue -1, we get to see what would happen if Trevor Fitzroy went back in time to try and convince Professor X to never create the X-Men. Although Bishop travels back in time to try and stop Fitzroy, it doesn't end up working out. Fitzroy shows the Professor of the future to come and all the war and prosecution that mutants will suffer. When Professor X meets Bishop, he inquires of Jean's fate and learns that she perishes, but that he and his X-Men remain a symbol of hope for the people. Unable to accept the dark future that awaits, however, Professor X seemingly agrees, despite Bishop's pleas, to never let the X-Men form, and Bishop ends up being locked up in prison in the past, with both Fitzroy and Bishop believing the other is the traitor. But who's really the traitor? Number 1. What if Spider-Man Back in Black? This story reimagines what would have happened had MJ ended up being shot by the Kingpin's hitman instead of Aunt May. Mary Jane as such does not end up in intensive care hanging to life by a thread, but instead dies pretty much instantly. This makes Peter lose control, going into a dark rage unlike any we've ever seen. He doesn't just plan on scaring and potentially finishing the Kingpin if MJ dies, because I mean she's already dead, but instead he plans on just straight up setting out to kill whoever was responsible for the hit, which he of course does find out was still Kingpin in this reality. Donning his black costume, he heads out planning to put an end to Kingpin once and for all, despite Aunt May and Iron Man trying to stop him and calm him down. In the end, Peter succeeds in killing Kingpin, Aunt May basically disowns him, and Iron Man has him arrested for murder, citing the Superhero Registration Act. Peter blames Iron Man for all this mess, by the way, demanding a trial with a jury, and Iron Man denies any wrongdoing, claiming Peter made his choice. Number 10. What if Jane Foster had found the Hammer of Thor? This one isn't so strange for the premise, but it's more bizarre because of where the premise took us in the end. This is a story we've also seen adapted to the main continuity, though fortunately it does not quite share this same ending, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Jane ends up finding the hammer of Thor and becoming the goddess of storms, taking up the mantle Thordis. Lady Sif, missing Thor, ends up finding and falling in love with Donald Blake, who is later revealed, of course, to be the true Thor when Odin asks Thordis to return his hammer to him. As thanks for her service, however, Odin makes Jane a goddess. However, as Jane was in love with Donald, who is now Thor, and is in love with Lady Sif, her heart is broken, and she has to be returned to her mortal self because of this. But Odin has a better solution and proposes to Jane, who agrees, to marry him, and then they all live happily ever after. With Jane finding that those very qualities she both admired and loved in the mortal Don Blake are also to be found in the father of immortal Thor. My goodness. That's a very strange ending to that story. How about instead of being with my son, you be with me, his father, haha. Okay, Odin, what? I feel like I like it better when Odin just doesn't really like Jane. I think that works more. Is that weird? Number 9. What if the Avengers were the last superheroes on Earth? This story allows us to imagine what the world would be like if all the superpowered beings on Earth were defeated by the Avengers. At the behest of the Scarlet Centurion, the Avengers attempt to eradicate all superpowered beings, including themselves. In the end, after all threats have been defeated, they decide to disband, being the last ones with powers, in order to usher in an era of peace on Earth. They all go off to live their own normal-ish lives. Thor returns to Asgard, Tony returns to being a billionaire playboy in Las Vegas, only to realize that it doesn't really bring him any joy and actually considers entering into politics. And Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym actually seem to find quite a bit of happiness, going off and getting married and focusing on their time with one another, which is kind of sweet. I guess if they weren't superheroes, it would work out pretty well for them. Scarlet Centurion does return to threaten Earth and forces the Avengers to come together one more time, but after defeating him, they once again go their separate ways back into retirement. And they also kind of question, like, if being a superhero is actually a bad thing, because does it create more problems than it solves? Just a quick reminder, if you love these what if lists, I personally love bringing them to you because these stories are amazing. Be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all the things. Number 8. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? This story comes to us from volume 2 of the What If series that started back in 1989. In issue 71, we get to imagine a reality where instead of just one Hulk, or the members of the Hulk family plus Hulk, we had 1,000 of them, which I would say is ultimately too many Hulks. In this story, it was the bombing on Hiroshima that resulted in these thousands of Hulks coming into existence, survivors of the attack that were basically mutated, so they became Hulks. In the end, Bruce Banner, aka Hulk, who of course goes on to become the Hulk in the story, must attempt to stand up against this army and attempt to defeat it with the help of some friends. Number 7. What if Betty Brant, instead of Spider-Man, had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This one comes to us from a 3-part story and is simply one story within that. It is from the original What If series volume 1 from 1997, issue number 7. Here, Betty Brant, instead of Peter Parker, is the one bitten by the radioactive spider, gaining spider-like abilities. While the story isn't a strange premise at all, like I don't think it's weird for Betty Brant to become, a version of Spider-Man, what really makes this one stand out for me in terms of its weirdness is Betty's costume here, which is it's something. It's also odd that in this alternate reality, Betty happens to be the only alternate person to become Spider-Man that manages to survive the ordeal, with both John Jameson and Flash Thompson in this issue, who are featured in the other 2 stories, dying as a result of gaining spider powers and attempting to use them. Instead of Betty choosing not to pursue the thief that kills Peter's Uncle Ben, she simply is unable to because she used up all her web fluid posing for pictures for Peter. Which is a whole other thing, but also, wait, can't you just go after them anyways? Don't you have superpowers? It doesn't matter that your web fluid is gone. Anyways, she still blames herself for Uncle Ben's death and decides to quit being Spider Lady, which I think is a little harsh. I feel like she wasn't really super responsible for that, but I guess she could have gone after him. I don't know why she didn't do that. Be like, use your super strength, climb on walls, do any of the other things you can do. Number 6. What if Submariner never regained his memories? This story allows us to glimpse into an alternate reality where Namor never met the Human Torch and never ended up regaining his memories and returning to Atlantis, learning that he was the true ruler of the underwater kingdom. Instead, the Submariner remains unaware of his true heritage and ends up joining a ship's crew, finding himself inexplicably drawn to the sea. I wonder why. The captain of the ship, Namor's friend McCandless, ends up being mutineered against and goes overboard while injured when he believes they found the lost entrance to the center of the earth. Namor, or Mr. Smith as he's known, follows after him and ends up being retrieved from the ice-cold water by Inuits later on. They end up worshipping Namor as the Lord of the Frozen Sea, along with frozen Captain America, who they worship as the Lord of the Frozen Ice. And Namor's like, I guess this is my life now, and I'm pretty good with it. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and now he just gets to be the Lord of the Sea really far up north where it's cold. Cool, I guess? Number 5. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? While all of these stories are based on things that actually did happen, this is also based on something that did happen, so if you think it sounds weird because it's just so random, that is a thing that actually happened, where Iron Man and Doctor Doom in main continuity traveled back to the time of Arthurian legend. However, rather than getting back home in this version while Doom manages to leave, he leaves Iron Man trapped in the past. Oh no! A weird turn of events ends up leaving Tony Stark as the ruler and king of England following the death of his friend King Arthur. Tony actually proves to be a great king and lives out his days there in the past just as an accomplished and celebrated ruler. I actually wonder what effect that would have had on the present, because I feel like everything would be very different if Tony Stark were the king of England. This all goes down in issue 33 of the 1997 What If series, so you can check that out if you want. Number 4. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? One of them is just being a giant brain. It's true. Actually, overall, these powers feel very Doom Patrol meets X-Men in my opinion. In this alternate story, when subjected to cosmic radiation, the FF get completely different powers than what each member has in main continuity. Johnny becomes a robot, Ben gets dragon-like wings, Reed is just a disembodied brain, admittedly not a very great power, and Sue ends up with the least original powers, getting Reed's old powers instead. The ability to stretch her body like Taffy or Silly Putty. Really, I feel like Sue always gets sort of like the worst part of these stories whenever she's in a what if. Hers are always so like quick or just so kinda lame. And I'm like, dang, why doesn't Invisible Woman get some cool stuff? I think she was still Invisible Girl at this time though, maybe that's why. Number 3. What if Aunt May instead of her nephew Peter had been bitten by that radioactive spider? This story reimagines what would have happened if once again it was not Peter Parker who received the fateful radioactive spider bite, but instead was his elderly Aunt May. This is from a humor issue, so you know it's gonna be weird and you know it's gonna be great. And it is. Aunt May here ends up getting bit after realizing that Peter had left his lunch at home on the day he and his class were meant to visit the exhibit at the Science Institute. And if you're like, Amanda, it's not called the Science Institute. Seriously, if you go to this issue, that is what is written on the building in the Science Institute. Of what? We don't know. She successfully delivers the forgotten lunch to Peter, cottage cheese and mashed string beans, but ends up feeling unwell on her way home, and finds that she has developed superpowers. She makes her own costume, becoming Spider-Man, and ends up facing off in this story with the ridiculous villain, Leapfrog. Because that's just how it goes. Number 2. What if the Fantastic Four all had the stretching powers of Mr. Fantastic? Oh boy, I love this issue because we get 4 stories where we get to imagine what it would be like if multiple members of the FF shared basically the same powers. And in the one where they all get stretching powers, they just never end up becoming the Fantastic Four because their collective power is just considered, well, kinda lame. Sue in fact insists that they never let anyone know of their powers because she feels like, and I quote, a freak. Both Sue and Ben feel as though the stretching powers are ridiculous, monstrous, ugly, and dumb, while Reed and Johnny actually think they're pretty neat and even could be useful. Still, Sue and Ben's way of thinking wins out, so the Fantastic Four never become a superhero team. Number 10. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? What else would Spidey get up to? Well, in the long run, he basically ends up as a kind of television personality, an actor, and a producer. Spider-Man makes movies that he stars in as an action hero, but still keeps his identity identity a secret. In the end, he works toward promoting other vigilantes through films that he produces and still ends up getting involved in crime fighting of sorts. A ton of villains in the form of the Sinister Six end up fighting against him. Well, really they end up fighting against Daredevil, and then Spider-Man's like, Daredevil, help me. But in the end, he's like, I gotta help because Daredevil's just one guy, and he doesn't really have superpowers in the same way that Spider-Man does. Included in this Sinister Six team-up is J. Jonah Jameson, who blames Spider-Man for the destruction of his life and his paper. In the end, Spider-Man realizes that he really mucked up by using his powers for gain instead of for good, which, fair. But he did have a really sweet cape, so there is that. Number 9. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? The story that started it all off. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four is what if that in theory doesn't really sound too crazy until you realize what happens as a result. Spider-Man initially attempted to impress the FF by breaking into the Baxter building to show off his skills and strength. This happened way back when in the original comics. However, in the main continuity reality, they weren't too impressed by his antics and initially denied him entry to the team. In this version of the story, however, Sue Storm feels compelled to give Spidey a chance and help make it work so that he can pay his and Aunt May's bills while also acting as a hero within the team. However, she later becomes jealous when she is left behind on a mission and Spider-Man gets to go, which, I mean, fair enough. Sue's like, hello, I'm here too. In the end, this causes her to run into the arms of Namor, who she then joins, leaving Reed Richards, and with Spider-Man taking her place on the team. Sue is also transformed into an Atlantean by a device Namor created just for this purpose, in case I guess it one day happened that Sue wanted to join him and become an Atlantean, and she can no longer as a result breathe oxygen. I just love how this story ends. I feel like it's kind of random, but it's also kind of great. I just ship Sue and Namor so much, that's the problem here. I'm into it. I'm like, yes, Sue, be Namor's conscience. Rule the underwater kingdom. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it and more what if videos, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, we got a what if playlist, so go click the playlist wherever it is on the screen. I don't know, is it here? Is it somewhere? Click it. Number 8. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Just even saying this title feels weird. This one comes to us from the one-shot What If Infinity Thanos. In this story, Thanos ends up joining and being accepted into the Avengers while they face off with the Builders. He and the team succeeded in defeating their enemy, but at great cost, losing Captain America along the way. In a shocking twist of events, even more shocking than Thanos becoming an Avenger in my opinion, he also ends up taking up Cap's shield after he dies in battle, and almost seems to mourn his loss? It's a weird one, but if you want to see Thanos rub shoulders with Thor and Captain Marvel, then this is definitely the story for you. Number 7. What if you were Spider-Man? This is one of those very short stories that is summed up within basically a page, or in this case, 2 pages. 2 panels. Here, the what if question posed is what if you, yourself, were Spider-Man? I mean, if I were Spider-Man, I would probably carry my partner a little more securely while swinging around town, and I'd try to be a little kinder to myself when it came to all the self-guilt and blame that we usually see Spider-Man feeling over all of his failings. I'd definitely be doing weekly therapy sessions if I were Spider-Man. But don't think too hard about what you do differently or the same as Peter Parker, because the end to this what if is pretty hilarious and dark all at once. Because you are then greeted with a panel featuring a tombstone that says, "Here lies Spider-Man," where there is also a little space for you to fill in your name, and a bunch of villains surrounding it. Because of course, none of us average Joes could make it as Spidey. Har har. But also, it's probably true. I don't think I could actually make it as Spidey. Although we would have powers, right? I guess if we didn't have powers, we'd really be screwed though. Number 6. What if Helen Taylor had become Nova? This story takes place in the pages of issue 15 from Marvel's first What If volume beginning in 1977. Here we get a few stories involving alternate characters taking up the mantle of Nova. One such character is a woman named Helen Taylor, who is basically a random civilian, redhead, and a wife. Or should I say a widow? She gets the power of Nova just after her husband is murdered in the streets in front of her after a mugging gone wrong. Helen swears to use her newfound power to get revenge, believing the powers are kind of an answer to her plea for some way to extract vengeance on the murderer, who we know as Willie DeBrow, or Willie DeBro, depending on how you want to say that. Nova sets off shaking down every criminal joint she can find in the city and making quick work of the Kingpin along her way to boot. The Fantastic Four manage to stop her and capture her to find out exactly what her powers are and where they came from and sort of why she's doing all this. And while this is going on, we learn that months ago, Willie perished in a car accident and has been dead ever since. What a twist. And if you're like months ago, does that make sense? Yes, this story takes place over the course of months. I actually went back to look for that because I was like, that's so crazy, it's such a long period of time. A long period of time and only a few pages. Number 5. What if Ben Parker's nephew was Galactus? I love this story. This is a humorous what if story included in issue 3 of volume 2 of the What If series. In this story, we find out what would have happened if Uncle Ben's nephew was Galactus instead of Peter. Galactus arrives home to find out that his Uncle Ben has been murdered, but he refuses to accept this, mourning the death of his uncle, who gave him his very first microscope. Oh no. With a mere thought, he vaporizes his uncle's murderer, reducing him to protoplasmic slime. Then he uses the power cosmic to restore his uncle to full health, even giving him powers and turning him into a Silver Surfer version of himself. Silver Uncle Ben? The story has a happy ending with Aunt May satiating her nephew's hunger with a very hefty helping of wheat cakes. Oh, it's so great. It's so wholesome. Number 4. What if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Or more specifically, what if Wolverine had fallen through a portal and ended up in the age of Conan the Barbarian and then lived on there? Yeah. This is what happens here, and of course, because this is what this story was always meant to be about, Wolverine and Conan end up going head to head, because we all know this is really a what if Wolverine and Conan fought each other story. In the end, Wolverine falls for Red Sonja because redheads, and Conan also ends up falling for Jean because redheads, after he falls back through a portal that sends him to Wolverine's time by accident. All in all, Conan ends up getting pretty messed up here, losing his hand, and then when he does return to Wolverine's time, without Logan's presence, Jean ends up going full Dark Phoenix and basically destroys the universe. Meanwhile, it's a happy ending for Wolverine, who stays in Conan's age and ends up with Red Sonja. What a strange but fantastic adventure. You can check this one out in issue 16 of the second What If volume, starting in 1989. Number 3. What if Spider-Man married Black Widow? This one is another one-panel story brought to us in volume 1's jam-packed humor issue, issue 34. Here we see a one-panel story that answers the question, what if Black Widow and Spider-Man ended up getting married? This is also just a strange question to pose, as these two, well, they don't have a ton of interaction in the comics, and they've never really been known to have any kind of long-lasting romance that could potentially lead to wedding bells. However, there could be a reason for that, it turns out. The what if uses a bit of wordplay for this scenario, implying that because Natasha is a Black Widow, she would end up eating Spider-Man. After all, that is what Black Widows try to do, in nature that is. I don't know if Black Widow could actually catch Spider-Man in the comics. I feel like he might be a little too fast, and he's also got a spidey sense, but whatever, it's just a fun what if story, so taking it way too seriously. Number 2. What if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? In this what if, we get to imagine what it would be like if the original Marvel bullpen had become the FF in real life, each being given their own superpowers matching the actual Fantastic Four team. Stan Lee, as such, becomes Mr. Fantastic, Flo Steinberg becomes Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl as she was still known then, Sol Brodsky becomes the Human Torch, and Jack Kirby becomes the ever-loving Thing. The story is crazy over the top, and it doesn't seem to paint any of them in too kind of a light, to be honest, with the staff being transformed by a mysterious device delivered to the office, sent courtesy of the S people. But who are the S people? They end up becoming even more famous than their comic book counterparts, the original Fantastic Four, and eventually ask Prince Namor for help. They don't get turned back into their normal selves, but they do uncover the mystery of who the S people are. Any guesses? S, it turns out, stands for Skrull. Surprise. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that because I was like, what starts with an S? And for some reason, Skrull did not come to my mind. Not reading a lot of Skrull stuff lately, obviously. Number 1. What if you were the Red Skull? I get the idea of what if you were Spider-Man, but what if you were the Red Skull? I mean, out of all the villains to pick, that is certainly a weird one to include here, Marvel. I did not see that coming. This story is also featured in issue 34 of the 1989 volume of What If, right under Spider-Man. Now, I see what they were trying to do, give you the option of a what if you were a hero or what if you were a villain, because, you know, that seems kind of fair. But I mean, given Red Skull's history, it just seems like a weird one to include when you could have picked, I don't know, a bunch of any other villains that exist that people might want to be more. Like, what about Doctor Doom or Green Goblin, which would make sense with Spidey, or even sometimes villain, sometimes hero, all-time thief, Black Cat. I mean, I would want to be Black Cat. Wouldn't you want to be Black Cat? She's so cool. What are some of your favorite strange Marvel tales?
10. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? Okay, I have to start with this one as it's the very first issue of What If, released back in the late 70s. Now the Watcher breaks it down how these things work, how these what ifs work, as he will in the Disney Plus original this summer with the smooth voice of Jeffrey Wright to accompany the beautiful animation. Now he explains to readers in all of these issues that there are multiple realities. And the first one we get to explore is where Peter joins the first family to make some dough. And yes, of course, they call themselves the Fantastic Five. Because 4 plus 1 is 5. See, we're alright here, we're pretty good. The Bugle doesn't hate on Peter. He's actually loved and respected in this story. And it's a good start for the web slinger on this long what if journey, but it's about to get so much more dark. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had rescued Gwen Stacy? Now issue 24 starts getting into the darker, but also kind of positive notes. See, instead of Spider-Man not catching Gwen with his webs, he ended up jumping off the bridge himself to rescue her. And then after that, well, love is in the air. She's alive. Things are obviously much more positive. He proposes, he reveals his identity to her. Things are looking quite nice. They're so good. And on top of that, Harry and Norman reunite. Harry found out about his father's secret identity and put his life on the line in order to save his father. So they worked it out as well. So far it's like yes and yes. So far so good. Now when Peter and Gwen get married at the ceremony, they're doing the cha-cha slide, drinking some champagne, having a great time, and then J. Jonah Jameson just waltz in with a bunch of police officers with footage that reveals Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Also, what a dick. Like, that really, that day? Do it tomorrow. Do it the day before. I don't know. The wedding? Not nice. Now this was the same tape that brought Norman and his father together, and it's the same tape that made Peter have to run for the rest of his life to protect the ones that he loves. It starts good, ends bad. Classic Peter. Number 8. What if Uncle Ben had lived? Okay, still in volume 1, now in issue 46, we see another positive scenario unfold, or rather it starts that way. Yeah. So Uncle Ben didn't suffer from back pain in the storyline, or sciatica or anything like that. He just slept comfortably that fateful night, which is great, but some things still have to happen. So instead of him going downstairs to check on that noise, it was Aunt May. So Aunt May ended up biting the bullet instead, and this changed the dynamic for Peter and Uncle Ben. I mean, obviously. See, Uncle Ben and Peter were quiet. Peter was for sure closer to May before she died, and when Ben figured out that Peter was Spider-Man, he actually encouraged him to continue and be there for the helpless, rather than, you know, just doing it out of some tortured sense of misplaced responsibility. So Spider-Man becomes better and more confident, which is a great sign. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it does wonders for our channel over here at Top 10 Nerd. Thank you so much for your constant support. Let's get right back into this list. I don't want to waste any more of your precious time, although I'm still doing so. Let's go back in. Number 7. What if Spider-Man had kept his 6 arms? Okay, what if volume 2 issue 42? We're getting into the weirder what ifs now. And it shows us what the world would look like when Spider-Man from Earth 92-100 keeps his extra 4 arms. Now the trick to this problem originally was in Michael Morbius's blood, but in this what if, it shows us that Morbius never actually made it to Dr. Connor's lab. Instead, Peter just stuck with these arms. He had no choice. Now eventually he tries to figure out something. He goes to the Xavier mansion for help. They all attack him because, you know, they don't recognize him. He has 6 arms and he's aggressive and upset. So Peter leaves them too. He's like, damn. So now he's bummed about this mutation even more, but he's easily able to stop Dr. Octopus. So that's, you know, that's a nice positive out of all this. Now things finally get easier for Peter when Mr. Fantastic surprises Spider-Man with Electro Vibra arms that will make his extra arms invisible, so he can at least blend in. That's progress, that's fair. Number 6. What if Spider-Man had kept his cosmic powers? Okay, in my last video I talked about these alternate powerful versions of Spider-Man, and amongst them was this Captain Universe version. So Spider-Man doesn't have these powers for too long, but in What If Volume 2 issue 31 we see a world where he remained the most powerful being. Now he starts off retiring. I mean, first of all, he wants a normal life. So Venom, of course, knows that he cannot beat this cosmic Spider-Man no matter what, so he agrees. He agrees to take over for the webhead after his retirement. So far, this is pretty wild. Peter enjoys retirement for a little bit, but in the end, he still feels like he has to help humanity. Now, at one point, he tries to demand Thor to make it rain to fix famine in all these drought-ridden lands, but Thor refuses as his oath doesn't allow him to do such things. They end up having a cosmic battle in space. Spider-Man literally punches him off the planet to start it off, and it's wild. They're both so powerful. Now finally Dr. Doom shows up. Well, we think it's Dr. Doom, but it's actually a Doombot. So the Doombot shows up offering to help get rid of Pete's problem, and it works. universe. It works so well, in fact, that the spider powers leave too, and Peter is finally able to retire and have a daughter with MJ. Now at the very end, they look into her eyes and they're all white. So MJ jokes and says, "Oh, she's got her father's eyes. How lovely. Now she's a god that you have to deal with. Enjoy." Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? What if Volume 2, Issue 4? We see a darker turn of events with Peter in that new black alien suit. Now we see a world where the sonic blast didn't break the two of them apart. They just stayed together and then trouble happens. The symbiote claims that Spider-Man and him are now one, and Reed Richards couldn't detect the symbiote for days because spider sense and the symbiote's camouflage powers, he was like, "Eh, good luck," zoom, disappeared. Now the symbiote ends up ripping through the Avengers, and due to the fact that Peter was stuck with the symbiote problem, he couldn't save SHIELD agents like he normally would. They ended up biting the bullet because of this, and then Peter ended up losing 50 years of his life trying to deal with this. He ended up dying of old age just on the ground. It's dark, but it's a really good what if. Number 4. What if Spider-Man had a Spider-Girl? What if Volume 2, Issue 105, Mayday Parker has another chance of life rather than, be written out. Now this takes place years after her father Peter retired. Now Mayday Parker began getting powers of her own when she was around 15 years old, and when Normie Osborn stepped up as the new Green Goblin, she stepped up as the new Webhead. She found an old outfit that belonged to Ben Reilly and became Spider-Girl. Now the issue did so well that Marvel launched its own universe to continue these stories. Now it's called the MC2 universe. Number 3. What if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Ooh, it's dark. Written by Richard Howell, Volume 2, Issue 17. Now this one is dark, obviously by the title you know what's gonna happen, but it's really compelling. What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete in the streets, he's patrolling the city when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven, and just like that, he unloads a beating. He kills Peter, and then to celebrate, he eats a bunch of spiders, and then suits up in his clothes. Like, what a weirdo. What a monster. So now he's Spider-Man. He's the captain now. Okay, cool. Now what's step 2, you freak? At the same time, MJ is approached by a couple of thugs on the street, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Now MJ can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't even recognize her, first of all, and the way that he's fighting these guys is just brutal. Like, it's not for the faint of heart. So Captain America, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what is going on with the wall crawler. Now they did a decent job wearing down the beast, but still they needed more power. So he ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? I guess. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker. This Spider-Man is indeed not the same. So that's one scenario that happens. Spider-Man's identity's out, which sucks. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing that news, and now she's messed up for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public either at this point. So the story ends up with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter can't catch a break in any of these universes. Number 2. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? One of my favorite what ifs. This is so amazing. Okay. What if issue 19, written by Peter Gillis? We see a life for Peter if he decided to take out his uncle's killer in that moment instead of, letting him get away and then the rest of his life happening the way it did. So what if Spidey was Spider-Man but just for the fame? What if he just wanted to be a famous dude? Go get the TV news people, he says. Also, TV news people, that's a funny way to put it. Now he's the big dog in town. He just wants to brag about how he takes down these criminals. He even refers to Flash as a nobody, which I mean, words hurt, Peter. Like, that's, you don't call somebody a nobody. That's pretty rude. And then he goes on the Johnny Carson show to be the cool cat in town, where it's revealed on the show that John Jameson, American astronaut, had died upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. And then JJ is heartbroken that the real heroes have to die instead of these costume clowns just kicking their feet back, talking shit on talk shows, So Peter realizes what matters most by the end of the story, thankfully. But having Flash call a nobody, it's honestly worth the read for all the bad stuff that happens. Number 1, what if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Okay, this one is jam-packed. We have 3 different scenarios to enjoy, and this is one that I definitely left this one for number 1 for a reason. It's so good. I mean, first of all, like I said earlier, who wouldn't want to be Spider-Man? You probably imagined it to yourself when I said it. What would you do if you were Spider-Man? Would you go for the fame? Would you kind of lay low? Would you take out criminals in like a cool way? Would you tell your family? Would you make a Twitter? Would you I am Iron Man it and just tell everybody? Well, in What If Volume 1, Issue 7, back in the late 70s, we see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson all get their shot at being the web slinger, and it's way harder than I thought it was gonna be. So Flash gets bit, and he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and you know, he's maybe a little bit too harsh, not gonna lie. And then he decides, oh, you know what, I'm pretty good at fighting people, I'm gonna take a crack at professional wrestling. But due to his super strength, he accidentally kills a guy doing this. The Vulture has an easy time taking him on as well, so it's not really the best in any scenario. And then Betty Brant is now up next. Now her costume is pretty sweet. It makes for great photo shoots, apparently. But while she was making TikToks, she ran out of web fluid, and when a thief ran by and got away, she had no web stuff. She couldn't do anything. She was like, I used my powers. I'm out for the day. See ya. And that thief was the one who took Uncle Ben's life. And then next up is JJ's son, John Jameson. While his outfit was pretty on point, his judgment was not. He wasn't good at the superhero life, and he died trying to stop a space shuttle from crashing. So we like ending on fun notes here at Top 10 Nerd. Off the list with number 10, What If the Juggernaut. Okay, to start this sad list, we got What If starring the Juggernaut. It was released in 1997, written by George Gonzalez, and we kick off in a world where Sentinels have already wiped out all superheroes. Great start. Plus there's this toxic gas that's filling up the atmosphere, which will kill all of life. So things are beginning grim right off the bat, okay. And all that's left now at this point is just the Juggernaut. Now he's hunting down these Sentinels. He wants to die, but his own invulnerability won't let that happen. Kind of like Hulk the End, just a sad, strong man in a world full of rubble. So he sees Iron Man's helmet, he sees Cyclops' cracked visor. He's just walking down horrible memory lane. Then he meets a couple of surviving mutants, and they're not in good condition, mentally. I mean, they're actually blaming Juggernaut for killing the X-Men, and it all ends with Juggernaut knowing he's going to be the last living being on the planet, and that it's his own damn fault. And before we go on to number 9 for our next sad what if story, if you guys could go ahead and please like this video, or else we'll be on a what if you didn't like the video, and then it's gonna be a sad video on all the alternate futures where you didn't like our videos. So please go ahead and do that, because that would be great. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to the list. Number 9. What if Cable had destroyed the X-Men? Well, this one just sounds bad right off the hop. So after Professor X came back to Earth, the team was never going to be the same again. At this X-Men meeting, Xavier gets in a fight with Cable, and then all of a sudden it turns into Cable and his crew versus everybody, and it was just this big brawl. Now they escape, but later on, Cable kills Xavier, Jean, and Scott with a siren bomb. So now everybody's deciding on what to do with this guy. Wolverine's team wanted to kill him, and Storm's team wanted to bring him in. Both are pretty bad. So the Avengers have to step in and fight their battles while they're all working their own stuff out over there. So the Avengers are like, just do your thing, we're gonna go fight your bad guys, just wrap it up. But eventually Cable and his team is killed by Wolverine's team. Number 8, what if Wolverine battled Conan the Barbarian? Written by Glenn Herdling and released in 1990, what if Wolverine had battled Conan the Barbarian? So basically Conan and Wolverine switch dimensions. So we have Wolverine causing trouble in the Hyborian Age alongside Red Sonja, and Conan smashes Cyclops in the head with a rock, which causes the full fury of the Phoenix Force to be unleashed. So now this has caused a ripple effect, so the psychic rapport was shattered, and without Wolverine to hurl Colossus at her, there's nothing that prevents Jean Grey from transforming into her dark persona before she can destroy herself, resulting in the destruction of the entire universe. So just like that, Cyclops gets hit with a rock, and then it all goes to So yeah, crossovers are for sure fun, but you gotta look at the possible ways it could go poorly as well. Wolverine versus Conan the Barbarian is definitely one of those ways. Number 7, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? In this reality, Professor X is the one who becomes Juggernaut and gets buried. Now this causes him to go down a completely different path when it comes down to the X-Men, because after this, he never ended up creating the X-Men because he was stuck. So now the Fantastic Four wants to defeat Magneto instead. So Professor X, he's still listening. He's using his mind powers. He's knowing what's going on out there. He's kind of getting pissed that he's not able to go out and help. So he digs his way out, and his telepathy powers are now stronger than ever with his new Juggernaut super strength. So he takes over the country with his own X-Men posse to enforce these anti-human laws. So Cyclops even sided with Magneto at this point because he could block Xavier's telepathy. So they're battling it out on Asteroid M, and Cyclops is trying to remind Xavier about his original dream, you know, with humans and mutants living together in harmony. And before he could really consider it, the ground beneath him exploded and he got launched into space, probably forever, and man, that's gotta be boring. Imagine not dying in space. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. This should be number 1 maybe, I don't know. Number 6, what if the Hulk died and Kyra lived? written by Greg Pak, released in 2007. Okay, so we start with the Hulk saving Kyra by throwing her out of the way of the explosion instead of the ship. So now the Hulk had died along with Crown City. And Kyra, she's pretty pissed, right? She takes all the old power from the planet and gets ready with her sights set on Earth. She's coming. First stop, of course, being the moon, where she defeats Black Bolt and then implants a obedience disc on him. So when Strange and Sentry come to the rescue, she makes Black Bolt use his sonic scream, which of course results in both of them dying. She's killing everybody fast, okay? So Heroim comes to stop her and says that basically if you kill everybody on Earth, nobody can honor your dead husband. So she says, fine, but you're gonna wish you were dead instead. And then it cuts to 21 years later and she's made all the remaining heroes build this massive Hulk statue. And when it's finally done, she walks onto the hand of the statue and then turns into stone, joining him. The end. Yeah, how sad is that? I mean, I feel like it wouldn't take those guys 21 years to build a statue. I mean, if they're getting paid by the hour, sure, then by all means, go for it. Number 5, what if the Avengers had never been? Written by Jim Shooter and Gil Kane, released in 1977. This was actually the first what if issue with a major death. So of course it has to be on the list somewhere. So we start off with the Hulk. Now this time he's not hitting, he's actually quitting. Now this caused the Avengers to dismantle. So Stark asked Rick Jones to find the Hulk, Thor went back to Asgard, and Jan and Hank went back to living as normal people. So Rick finds him, but he's now being held hostage from the Green Giant. So Stark swoops in and saves him, and they head back to the Avengers mansion. So Namor and the Hulk call out the Avengers, or rather what's left of them. So Iron Man makes a few iron suits for the others, and the suits, I mean, they aren't Tony Stark. They can't control these things nearly as well as he can. Unless you're in the movie Iron Man 3, then everyone can do that all of a sudden. So they stay in retirement. They're like, screw that, I don't want any part of that. So he's like, whatever. He powers up his own suit a little bit too much, and then he heads to the battle alone. He fights a bit, and then right when he's about to be ended, the rest show up. Jan, Hank, and Rick are back. Nice. So Tony is done at this point. His armor is weak, he's close to being finished off, so he uses his remaining power to regenerate Hank's armor. So the Hulk snaps out of it and goes after Namor, while the rest of our heroes mourn over a fallen Tony Stark, who sacrificed himself to save his team. Similar vibes to Endgame. A lot of feels in that one, okay? A lot of feels. A good number 5 feels train. Number 4, what if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glutt, released in 1977, we get to see a dream play out. Look, we've all probably wanted to be Spider-Man at one point or another. Of course, I mean, doing backflips and swinging downtown, that's gotta be the vibe. But of course, when it comes to stopping criminals and taking out supervillains, it's probably pretty stressful. So in this what if, we get to see this idea play out. We see other characters have a crack at the life of the web slinger, starting with Flash Thompson. And let's just say it's a lot harder than it looks. So we got Flash Thompson. Now after he gets bit, he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and he feels pretty good with his new given abilities, and he plays it out a bit. So he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling, maybe make some cash, which is a pretty good idea. I mean, you're a superhero, so you can definitely win most, if not all, fights. But he accidentally kills the guy. Sorry, oops. Then Betty Brant is now up with the powers. Okay, so let's see how she would do in the life. Well, her costume for starters is pretty badass. But when she runs out of web fluid while making TikToks, a thief runs by and gets away. And that thief, of course, being the one to take Uncle Ben's life. So far, so bad. Now finally, we have our third contender with the powers. John Jameson. While his outfit was also pretty good, he couldn't do the job like Peter, and he actually died while trying to prevent a space shuttle from crashing. I guess it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, to be fair, if something actually happened and I had webs, I really wouldn't know what to do. I would do a backflip and be like, is it fixed? No? It was cool though. Number 3. What if the Punisher killed Daredevil? We all know the Punisher as the guy who usually brutally kills criminals. See, with superheroes, those guys he likes to hit with a tranquilizer. But in this what if, we see Daredevil get hit with one of those tranq darts and fall off a building. So while Kingpin prepared for his next step now that he's out of the way, Spider-Man stepped in to deliver some justice on Frank Castle. So he finds the Punisher, and Punisher has no tranq darts left. So he shoots Spider-Man in the shoulder. It's messy, but not fatal, he says. He should survive unless he exerts himself, which he does. And his identity is then revealed. Then it cuts to Aunt May's house and she grabs a paper, reads the shocking headline, and then the house explodes from a missile launched from the Silvermane City. Boom, house gone. And then after a little while, Peter shows up in a hospital gown, ready to get some revenge on Frank. Peter does pretty well in the fight, so well he's actually just moments away from throwing the Punisher off of a building to his death. But the Punisher stalls and says he has info about his Aunt May, and this slows Peter down for just a split second, allowing for the Punisher to unload on Peter. God, imagine if they introduced Frank Castle in the MCU and then they immediately did something like this. Number 2, what if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Released in 1990, written by Richard Howell. Yeah, judging by this title alone, this one's a little sad. I figured we're already on the Spider-Man misfortune train, so I had to throw this one in next, you know? What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete patrolling the streets when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven in a net, and just like that, he unloads, killing Peter Parker. And of course, he eats a bunch of spiders and suits up himself to celebrate. Yeah, you eat a bunch of spiders, now you're Spider-Man. That's how it works. I think a human eats like, what, 7 spiders in a year when they're sleeping? So we have like, what, 7,000 to go? So now he's Spider-Man, just like that, cool. Meanwhile, MJ is like, where on earth is that Peter Parker guy? And then MJ is approached by a couple of thugs, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Only it's Kraven, but she doesn't know that. But she can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't recognize her, and he's way more brutal with taking out these thugs. So Cap, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what's up with the wall crawler. They did a decent job of wearing down the beast, but he needed more power. He ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? Comics are weird. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker, and that the Spider-Man is indeed not the same. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing about the news. She's messed up now for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public. The story ends with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter just can't catch a break, eh? Oh my God. And finally, number 1, the saddest of them all, what if Wolverine father? Written by Rob Williams, released in 2011, we start off with Wolverine taking out the Winter Soldier. And we see a world with Wolverine and Daken if they had spent their life growing together as father and son. So now we get to see what it would have been like if Logan was there for them the whole time. Now in this reality, they're named John. This life, however, was filled with repression and lies and led to John leaving his home and rising up as Daken, becoming the leader of the Japanese underworld. So Wolverine tried to save him, but because of the way he was raised with this version of Logan, he looked at him like a monster. He viewed himself as a monster too. This is the Muramasa blade, John, says Logan as he stabs him. Healing factors don't work on it. The issue ends with the boy dying beside his father, and Logan uses the same blade on himself. And that's the end. That's the end of the comic. Everyone dies, everyone's sad.
Professor X as Juggernaut. In What If number 13, the question is posed, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? And the answer is, it would make Ben Ball feel uncomfortable. This matchup is maybe a little tough to justify for this list since it's about superheroes, and in this story, Professor X, or not, does enlist all of the mutants to take over the world, but it's still Professor X in there somewhere, and it's arguable that he may have been turned from good to evil by the influence of the Sidorak gem. I just had to put this strange character on the list because I think it's such a weird combination to even consider, let alone craft a whole issue around. Look at him. Chonky, fully mobile Professor X. When he puts the helmet on, things are less weird though, but it's still one for the list.
Number 9, Wolverwimp. Wolverwimp is an alternate version of Wolverine who, instead of having an adamantium skeleton, has a styrofoam one. He appears in one of the joke covers included in issue 100 of What If. This poor version of Wolverine is threatened by a little girl who is a female child version of Magneto. Yeah, it's weird. While Wolverine is fearsome and tends to fight for what he believes in no matter the odds, it seems that Wolverwimp is all too ready to shy away from a fight as he's terrified of a conflict. Honestly, I really can't blame the poor guy. He is a styrofoam skeleton, so yeah, I don't even know how you'd walk around with that, never mind trying to be a hero and like stand up to bad guys. Probably just like crumple over.
Frog Thor, or Throg. There's not much more to it than that. The question posed in this issue is, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? It really has nothing to do with Frog Thor, but he makes an epic appearance nonetheless. The transformation actually takes place in Thor number 363 and is revisited in this What If issue. If you don't already know, or couldn't already have guessed, Thor's slimy amphibian form comes at the hands of his brother Loki. What makes this moment great in What If number 12 though is that Storm is forced to face off against Frog Thor, with the stakes being the prosperity of all of Asgard. Luckily, she wins the fight and Frog Thor is turned back into regular Thor. Although, is that really a win? I liked Frog Thor. If you want to see more of Throg, you can catch him in another storyline as well, where a shard of Thor's hammer is actually picked up by a frog, turning it into a pretty powerful little dude. I just thought that was worth mentioning as well. Frog Thor.
Number 7, Joshua Guthrie and Unit Gem 211131. This is actually a pretty sad story, but one that is also kind of silly. It's basically reminiscent of the Iron Giant. Remember the Iron Giant? Remember all the tears that we cried? Except instead of any old giant robot, we have a Sentinel. Unit Gym 211131. This Sentinel is found by Josh Guthrie, little sibling to Husk and Cannonball, who never has his mutant powers manifest. In this world anyways. On our 616, Josh ends up getting wings and musical mutant abilities, going by the codename Icarus. Here, however, he just gets a Sentinel, who has broken programming and instead believes his prime directive is basically to protect and serve Josh. However, he still remembers that mutants are a threat, and when he meets Paige and Sam Guthrie, ends up battling against them, while painted up like an X-Men. Josh's idea, because he wanted to prove that he and his robot were basically a better team than the X-Men ever could be. Oh boy. Paige and Sam end up beaten by the Sentinel, but just as it's about to terminate the defeated mutants, oh no! Josh steps in to protect his siblings. He says that the Sentinel can't kill them without killing him as well. As such, the robot realizes it is the main threat to Josh and decides to terminate itself instead in order to protect him, because that's its prime directive at this point. Sure, Sentinels are kind of villains, but in this story, in a roundabout way, Unit Gym 211131 is actually kind of the hero. Although he threatens Paige and Sam and Josh, he also ends up saving them from himself. I don't know why I made the Sentinel a he, but the Sentinel's a he now, because I'm not going to go back. I gave the Sentinel a gender, I hope that's okay. Josh mourns the loss of his robo friend, and it is ultra sad. Just like Iron Giant.
Thanos Captain America. In What If Infinity Thanos, the question is posed, what if Thanos joined the Avengers? And the result is this really strange depiction of Thanos wearing a Captain America suit. What goes on in this storyline is that Thanos joins up with the Avengers to fight the Builders, and he doesn't even try to take over the world, or try and kill half the population, or anything like that. That is until Captain America is killed and Thanos takes over for him. Because then he decides it's time to start taking over stuff again. After he helps the Avengers destroy the Builders with a swift battle, he goes back to his classic Thanos self and makes it his duty to take on Cap's old position as leader. And then quickly makes it his duty as well to lead the Avengers and the rest of the heroes of Earth into war with the rest of the universe. So yeah, he doesn't take over Earth, but he seems to be ready to help them take over other worlds alongside him. Fair compromise? I guess so. Either way, the cover of this issue just feels so weird, and I felt that Captain America Thanos needed to make an appearance on this list.
Number 5. Actual Black Widow. Black Widow in issue 34 of What If gets her own little mini comic taking up a third of a page. It's really kind of like just a panel. It answers the question, what if Spider-Man had married the Black Widow? Well, it wouldn't end well apparently. The joke is based on what Black Widows are known to do to their mates in nature. Female Black Widows, that is. In nature, they eat their mates, hence why in this comic Spider-Man doesn't fare too well. The implication is that Black Widow actually eats Peter here. We see her picking her teeth, looking quite content and burping, while behind her Spider-Man's suit looks pretty deflated with bones poking out of it and littered around it. So yeah.
You! Yes, you. In this issue of What If, the question is posed, what if you were Spider-Man? They start with a panel of Spider-Man swinging Mary Jane to safety, and they even encourage you to paste a picture of your own face over Spider-Man's to make it even more immersive. But moving forward, this issue doesn't really take much time to explore that question before absolutely roasting you beyond words. The very next panel shows a big group of all of Spider-Man's villains standing in a graveyard, pointing and laughing at a gravestone that reads, "Here lies, fill in your name here," and in big bold letters says, "You'd be dead, you're no superhero." So mean, but also very funny. I thought this was a great one to include because as much as Marvel is known for their meta commentary, this is just on a whole different level.
Number 3. Galen. Galactus may be better known as a villain in the Marvel Universe, the main Marvel Universe, or at least a powerful antagonist if you will, but in the What If reality of Earth 92201, he's actually better known for being a sort of everyday hero, if you will. When Galen as Galactus ends up in battle against Thanos, who wields the Infinity Gauntlet, he ends up defeated, being transformed into an amnesiac human left on planet Earth. When found, it just so happens that Galen's voice and appearance greatly resembled that of a young Elvis. People believed he was Elvis returned, positing that Elvis never really died. Galen even ends up believing he is Elvis and finds happiness on Earth with a woman named Gertrude and her son Tony. Warlock finds Galen and offers to turn turn him back into his form of Galactus, but Galen is actually so happy he chooses to remain on Earth and continue living as Earth's Elvis replacement, basically. It's a great story.
Stan Lee and the original Marvel bullpen as the Fantastic Four. Naturally, this issue poses the question, what if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? And what we see is a version of Mr. Fantastic with the likeness of Stan Lee, which is just so fun and bizarre. Jack Kirby, Flo Steinberg, and Saul Brodsky also appear as the other three, and they have themselves a fun, very original adventure as the popular titular heroes. Unfortunately, this issue apparently has some pretty sexist overtones, mostly aimed at Steinberg, which makes the Marvel creators come off as sort of unlikable, especially by today's standards. But regardless, it's a lot of fun to see the people behind the scenes of many of our favorite comics in the forefront of this unique issue of What If.
Number 1, Sheep Boy. When it comes to characters that really stick out to me in the world of Marvel What If, I gotta say a lot of them come from the funny little bits of the comics that aren't even full issues. Because I mean, come on, they're so wonderfully ridiculous. One such example at one such point, I guess, is the notorious Sheep Boy. Sheep Boy made his first appearance in What If issue 100. He was created by Jim Chung and is the reimagined version of Spider-Man. Basically, what if Peter Parker had been bit by a radioactive sheep instead? What would we get? Sheep Boy, which would really make for an interesting clone saga when it comes to figuring out the cloning process. Because, you know, aren't we like all about sheeps when it comes to cloning? Actually, I think that through cloning sheep we actually learned that cloning humans would be ill-advised. So maybe there'd be no more clones in the Marvel universe if it started with sheep. No more clone sagas after that. I don't know if that would be good or bad. Depends on how much you like or dislike clones.
At number 10, we have Benjamin Grimm with dragon wings. In What If number 6, the question is posed, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? And the answer is that things get very weird. Basically, instead of taking the form of the Thing, Benjamin Grimm's powers are reduced, or ameliorated, I guess, to basically just 2 giant dragon wings on his back. He decides that he wants to be known by citizens as Dragonfly, which just proves that as long as you've got powers, people are gonna celebrate you no matter what. Someone even feels his wing and says, "Hey, I'm touching his wing," and it's kind of cold, which is bizarre to me because it adds that little extra bit of detail that I don't think I needed while reading this one. The other heroes get their own makeovers as well, and I'm covering another one later on in this list, but just seeing a shirtless Ben Grimm flying around with purple scaly wings made me think, well, I just needed to put him on the list. At number 9, we have Medieval Iron Man. In this What If, the question is asked, what if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? So, Iron Man is basically the same as he's always been, except what I find super weird in this issue is that he so brutally outmatches everyone in the medieval era, but doesn't hold back at all. I mean, just on the cover, you see him blasting his futuristic energy blast into a crowd of helpless soldiers as they're screaming for their lives. I don't know what gets into Iron Man in this issue that makes him think that he's in any moral position to be dropping into the medieval times and dominating the combat game, but that's just how this one plays out. And honestly, it's great. It's a weird portrayal of Iron Man given the context of the story, but it's honestly a pretty cool what if that I recommend checking out. At number 8 is The Watcher as a stand-up comedian. I know he's not really a superhero, but I'd argue that he's more good than bad, and he's surely got powers, so he's on the list. In this one, The Watcher asks a bunch of different what if questions, one being, haven't you always wondered what would happen if The Watcher was a stand-up comedian? Not really, but okay, let's see what he's got. Basically, this issue delves into some pretty bizarre artwork and poses a bunch of different questions in a row. I suppose these are the comedic premises that the Watcher is throwing at us as a stand-up comedian. Such riveting humor as, what if the Hulk were yellow? And what if the Thing were blue? And who could forget, what if the Invisible Girl dyed her hair? Okay, that one's pretty funny. But this one just struck me as very bizarre. Although I think that was the goal of this issue and probably all of the what if issues, so mission accomplished, I guess. At number 7, we have Maggie Nito. This is a very niche one, and I'll give you $1 if you can pause the video now and guess where this character makes her first and only appearance. Okay, Magneto is a mean little girl with a Venom shirt, and she appears on a gag splash page in What If issue number 100. Called Wolverwimp. Wolverwimp was covered in the first part of this video on the channel. It's basically Wolverine with styrofoam bones. But on the cover right next to him, we're not quite sure who Magneto is or what she symbolizes, but it's suggested that she may have some powers of her own, possibly similar to those of the popular anti-hero Magneto. Even though she's mean, it's arguable that she'd be considered a superhero if her story was given some more airtime. If she was meant to be the Magneto of this hypothetical storyline, we just hope she would take on the hero status that Magneto currently flaunts. I don't know. Comment below what you think Magneto's powers would be if she was given a proper issue. At number 6 is Rockstar Black Bolt. In this What If issue, a bunch of different questions are asked in the same comic, and each one gets a short exploration of what would happen. In the case of Black Bolt becoming a rock star, his voice would naturally dismantle the structure of the arena he was singing at, and probably beyond. Along with his band, the Inhumans, this image is just so weird to picture for some reason. Not the crumbling environment, but just the image of Black Bolt screaming his soul out into the microphone, singing none other than a Rolling Stones song. I suppose all these what ifs are gonna give us weird new perspectives of the characters we know doing things they don't normally do, but for some reason this one just gave me a weird vibe. Maybe it's that one panel where he's screaming into the mic with his tongue out. At number 5, we have Dr. Doom / The Thing. This one falls in the category of weird, but also pretty badass, at least in how he looks. And maybe arguable on whether or not he's a hero in this case, because it is Dr. Doom that turns into the Thing, not the other way around. But let's just call this character a direct mix between the Thing and Dr. Doom for the purposes of this list, which would make him good enough. Basically, in this What If, Ben Grimm is turned into the Hulk, and Dr. Doom is instead the one who's turned into the Thing. There's a lot going on in this story, as you can imagine, but for a brief period we get to see the rocky figure of the Thing decked out in Dr. Doom's green hood. And when he inevitably faces off against the Ben Grimm Hulk, he does get taken down a notch after a rough defeat. But it was a pretty weird combo while it lasted. Cool, but weird. But also cool, but weird. Definitely weird. At number 4 is Storm Thor. This character comes to be in the What If that poses the question, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? And the answer is that Storm is somehow able to lift Mjolnir and become Thor. There have been other heroes before that have wielded Mjolnir, like Beta Ray Bill, Captain America, and even Superman. But in this case, Storm becomes the goddess of thunder. And it's just a weird image to see her in the cape and shoulder armor. But it gets even weirder when she's tasked with clashing against a version of Thor that was turned into a frog, or the other way around, I can't really remember. If you saw the first part of this video, I covered Frog Thor already, but I figured we needed to talk about Storm Thor as well. It's fair to say that this was a weird what if issue. It's made it into both parts of this list. At number 3, we have 1000 Hulks. This obviously isn't one individual weird hero, but an event that spawns 1000 of the same character and creates a very weird army of nameless versions of the Hulk. So, what if? What would happen? Well, if you couldn't already have guessed, the answer is insanity. Basically, the title is What If the Gamma Bomb Spawned 1000 Hulks? But it's not quite what actually takes place in the story. The story explores the tragic events of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs and theorizes if instead of decimating whole populations, they actually spawned 1000 Japanese Hulks. It's a weird theory to ponder. I feel like they could have kept it out of a tragic historical context and still gotten the point across, but nonetheless, 1000 Hulks is a very strange and fun what if. Spoiler, they take over America, which you could imagine is totally possible if there were 1000 Hulks, and I'm sure they could do it in like a day. There'd be zero stability when they finally got control. At number 2, we have Reed Richards as a bodiless brain. This character shows up in the What If that asks, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? Yes, it's the same one that I covered earlier that had Ben Grimm sporting dragon wings. Only in Mr. Fantastic's case, he's reduced to a tiny little fleshy brain just laying on the ground. But he can talk and everything still. just telekinetically. He also seems to have mind control capabilities. What's hilarious about this version of Reed Richards is that he seems super optimistic about the whole thing. Like, he's completely vulnerable and helpless, but all in all, he's totally looking forward to life as a brain, or as Big Brain, which seems to be his new moniker. It's sort of obvious from the jump that his change into a brain is sort of a nod to Reed Richards' famed intellect as one of the greatest minds in the world. But I guess they wanted to see what he could accomplish with just the mind part and nothing else. Good thing he's got his Fantastic Four buddies to carry him around, because otherwise he'd still be sitting on that rock waiting for someone's mind to control. At number 1, we have Aunt May Spider-Woman. This one is self-explanatory really. The question is posed, what if Aunt May was the one bitten by the radioactive spider? It's at the end of issue number 23, volume 1. Check it out if you have time. Basically, she comes home and the spider's on the door frame. It bites her, and the next thing we know, Aunt May is crawling up the side of a building. Then she promptly sews her own costume together and starts fighting a frog-like villain with springs on his feet. What makes this character even goofier is that as all this is happening, she forgets that she'd been in the middle of baking bread and the dough has expanded beyond what was expected. Like way beyond. It pretty much fills her whole entire kitchen. She then takes the dough and uses it to her advantage as she summons it in battle to soften a big free fall, and then even turns it into a whip and hooks the frog dude's ankle. She literally uses the dough to like swing the frog guy into a tree and deliver the final blow. It's definitely one of the silliest moments in any Marvel comic book I've read thus far, and I'm just surprised it didn't make it into the part 1 of this video. Alright, that was the list. Thank you for watching. If you think there are even weirder what if superheroes, please leave them in the comments below because I'm very curious.
Number 7. What if the Punisher was a hall monitor? Dipping into a more comedic side of things because the last two were just straight tragic, the Punisher as a hall monitor. Short and sweet, and it couldn't get any better. He's watching the halls in a quiet, generic grade school in a typical town in USA. You can find this in volume 2, issue 34. It's pretty intense. I mean, it goes for the comedic take, but Frank Castle being Frank Castle in front of any children? That's a nightmare. They thought they were off the hook at the beginning of the issue. The kids reiterate the fact that the Hulk is no longer watching these halls, so they're fine. So once the Punisher sends them to the principal's office after getting caught, the last panel we see is the Hulk in the principal's chair now. It's a short one, but the idea is actually terrifying and hilarious all at the same time. Poor kids. I thought my principal was scary. I thought Mr. Hubert was scary. No, the Hulk is a bit more scary. A bit, just a little bit. Number 6. What if the Beast and the Thing continued to mutate? Volume 1, issue 37. When the Thing is being mutated from Virus X in the normal timeline, Captain America tells him about MODOK's base, but in this tale, the Thing takes off before he gets a chance to do so. So Captain America and Giant Man raid MODOK's base on their own, then they get the antidote that Bill can now use to cure his cancer. Ben reaches this point when he's evolving, and he ends up releasing all of this cosmic energy that 1, cured himself of Virus X, and 2, cured Alicia's blindness. Double win. Yes. Grimm is happy with the family, and the newly cured Giant Man takes Ben's spot on the Fantastic Four. It's good. This is a good one. We got one. Nice. Number 5. What if the Avengers had never been? Now, with all of these multiverse stories beginning in the MCU, it feels like the Avengers have never been further apart. It's exciting, but also a little concerning. This What If was actually the first What If issue with a major death, just 3 issues in. They're going for it. So we start off with the Hulk, and instead of smashing and hitting, he's dashing and quitting. He wants nothing to do with the team. So Rick Jones is sent to look for the Green Goliath, but he ends up being held hostage, where Tony Stark has to now come to the rescue. Now they make it back to the mansion, but Namor and Hulk want more. They challenge Earth's mightiest to the fight for their lives. Now Iron Man makes suits for Hank, Jan, and Rick, but they can't control the suits. It's too much for them, so they stay in retirement. So Stark powers up his own suit to the max, and then some more. So it's a lot of power going on, almost unobtainable. But then when the rest of the team finally do show up to the battle in Stark's other suits, Hank takes a hard hit. So Tony has to then transfer his suit's energy, that fat energy, in order to keep Hank alive. So even in this What If, Tony still throws his life down for others. How sweet. Number 4. What if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? In this reality, Professor X is the one who becomes Juggernaut and gets buried in the Temple of Sidorak. Now this caused him to go down a completely different path when it comes to the X-Men, because after this, well, he never created the X-Men, so now the Fantastic Four has to go against Magneto. So after Professor X Juggernaut head digs his way out, he discovers his telepathy was now much stronger with the added powers. What a treat. I mean, not really. He ends up taking over the country with his own X-Men posse to enforce these anti-human laws. Cyclops even sides with Magneto at this point because he's like, okay, at least this guy can block Xavier's telepathy. And it all comes down to this final confrontation with Cyclops and Xavier. They're battling it out on Asteroid M, and Cyclops is trying to remind Xavier about the vision, the original dream, with humans and mutants living together in perfect harmony. Doesn't that sound lovely? And then before he could really consider it, the ground beneath him exploded and he got launched into space forever. Oof! Number 3. What if Loki had found the hammer of Thor? The final issue of Volume 1 of What If, again, something we're kind of close to seeing in the MCU, especially with Loki Season 2 being confirmed. These timelines are about to be really enjoyable, and we might get a hint of this, I think. So Donald Blake ends up not finding the hammer because Loki tossed it into the woods, and then the Saturnians wiped out Donald. So Thor wakes up in the land of the dead, memory not included. This is all bad for Thor. It's not so much Loki using the hammer, he just alters the hammer's location, and then Thor's altered future is now a stressful one. Number 2. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? Okay, with John Watts directing the newest Spider-Man trilogy for the MCU and the upcoming MCU Fantastic Four reboot, this next what if might not seem that impossible. The first ever issue of What If finds Pete with a number 5 on his chest. The Fantastic Five has a ring to it. I kind of love the idea already. So Pete was low on cash, so he figured, you know what, I'm gonna break into the Baxter building and straight up force an audition for Marvel's First Family. So Sue recruits Peter and the team is formidable. They're great, they're solid. They're so good that Sue doesn't even feel like there's a need for her on the team anymore. There's always something sad. Don't do it, Sue. She ends up choosing Namor as her other half, even joining him in his kingdom under the sea. Now she did love Reed as well, but her departure from the team just made it work better with the fishy guy. Now if you want to see more of that altered storyline, because it is quite intriguing, jump ahead 20 issues once you're done this epic kickoff. And finally, coming in at number 1, what if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This is perhaps one of my favorite what ifs because I genuinely have thought about what would happen if I was Spider-Man. I work for Top 10 Nerd, of course I'm going to daydream about this. Thing is though, I'm afraid of heights, so it wouldn't exactly be smooth sailing. But I can dream, right? Even in the Marvel Universe, other big names can't handle the webs. In this what if, we see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson each get a swing at the sticky life. So Flash gets bit and then he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling with the new muscles and all. Now he may have underestimated his strength because he kind of accidentally killed the guy. You should have tapped. Oops. Next up, Betty Brant gets bit, and I had to admit her costume is for sure the most stylish. Very good, makes for great Instagram posts, sure. But when she runs out of web fluid making TikToks, the thief who took Uncle Ben's life was easily able to get away. She was like... And finally we see John Jameson's turn and he goes out like a hero. He tries to stop a space shuttle from crashing, and it's a lot harder than it looks.
Number 6. Fantastic Four as cosmonauts. Let's explore the what if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian? Well, for starters, their name is different. In fact, they're pretty much all different. Now, the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudian Richards, the commie Red Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, who is now Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin, who is still just Colossus and has all those powers except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, Piotr's sister Ilyana Rasputina, who seems to have the powers of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool than the 616 continuity. After the demise of Stalin, the team is put under KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of the team, is not having it, especially after he accidentally ends the life of Giant Man. Widowmaker makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero teams go on to fight for freedom and equality. But that isn't how you thought it would go. I didn't. Number 5. end, Daredevil is bullied and just gives up. One day, when fighting against Electro with Spider-Man, Daredevil is unaffected by a blinding flare set off right in front of his face by Electro. This kinda clues in Electro to the idea that maybe this Daredevil guy is already blind. And when Electro and Spider-Man ask Daredevil what color Electro's costume is, it seals the deal. Electro lets the whole world know by leaking this info to the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man actually sort of makes fun of him, saying it makes sense why he chose that yellow costume, because he couldn't see how bad it was, you know? Villains begin to take advantage of the massive weakness for Daredevil, and while he is able to hold his own still, he eventually decides to undergo an experimental treatment that restores his sight but removes his super senses. Now powerless, Matt Murdock and Karen Page get married and have a normal life, with Matt becoming the district attorney. Wow, kind of a nice ending there. Number 4, Limo Man. In one of those many crazy panels in number 34 of What If, remember that one where the Watcher is a comedian? We get to see a single panel that asks the question, what if Tony Stark owned an auto company instead of a weapons company? Now, whoever was writing this panel was absolutely cooking with gas. They knew what was up. Basically, if that was the case, then the world would get to interact with Limo Man. A hero with a license plate, belt, tire pauldrons, with rear view mirror horns, headlights on his chest, and a sweet pair of rollerblades. He is honestly the least cool Transformer you have ever seen. He does look like he's made up of a luxury car though, so I guess that gives him some kind of arbitrary style points. Right? At least the robber he seems to be facing seems to be a little bit worried. Number 3, 6-armed Spider-Man. In the legit continuity, Spider-Man undergoes an experiment to try and get rid of his spider abilities. Instead, he gains 2 extra sets of arms. Great success! In the original universe, he uses a serum with the blood of the living vampire Morbius to revert back to his normal self. But in What If number 42, Morbius is eaten by sharks, because of course he is. And Spider-Man is doomed to retain his 8 limbs. Ultimately, this Spider-Man learns that maybe these limbs are not a curse, but actually give him a buff in his agility and attack power. He is even able to save Gwen Stacy from her demise. Looks like someone rolled a natural 20. He was so popular that he went on to actually go on to be included in a few multiversal Spider events. So honestly, a great, if not weird, version of Spider-Man. Number 2, Dazzler, Herald of Galactus. Dazzler is already weird without being in a What If story. She's a collab between Marvel and a record label. That's all I have to say. Okay, so Dazzler's power is that she can convert sound into light. Pretty good for a disco singer. And especially so since she uses this power to literally dazzle people at her concerts. In What If number 33 though, Dazzler is chosen as the new Herald of Galactus, being the only being who could retrieve the old Herald who hid in a black hole, which she does. And then, in the alternate timeline, Galactus sends him back into the black hole as a punishment? I don't know, okay? She was given a huge boost with the power cosmic, and for some reason, even with her new boosted up powers, she decides to keep the disco ball rollerblades. She's actually really torn up about having to leave her world, but she vows to at least do good by not letting Galactus eat inhabited planets, which Galactus actually obliges because, well, it seems like he's got the hots for Dazzler, or whatever the world-eating equivalent of the hots is. There is a whole conflict with an armada, and then Galactus releases her to go back to Earth, which has been the victim of an apocalypse in her absence. And she goes back to him yet again as some kind of weird, twisted, intergalactic love story. I don't know, it's really strange. Number 1, Jane Foster becomes Thor. But Adam, this happens in the 616 continuity. Yes, but this one's a little bit different. In this What If story, number 10 actually, it is Jane Foster who first picks up the hammer Mjolnir, not Donald Blake. In this story, Jane accompanies Dr. Blake on his trip to Norway, and when he drops his cane into a ravine, she goes down there to get it for him instead. Striking the stick, she becomes Thordis. Yes, Thordis. Unlike the modern interpretation, a female wielding Mjolnir gets an entirely new name. Wielding the power of Thor, Thordis fights off the Saturn Rock people, and then turns the cane that she seems to have stolen from Donald Blake, leaving him helpless without a cane, into a hairbrush to better fit in with her feminine alter ego, because men don't use hairbrushes apparently. She has pretty much the same adventures as Thor. She's rejected by Odin, and Sif gets with Donald Blake, until the events of Ragnarok when Odin decides to give the hammer back to Blake because he can't accept Jane as Thor. And then, as thanks, he turns Jane into a different god and then marries her? Kinda gross, kinda really strange, kind of uncomfortable. Luckily, it's only a story that comes from the question, what if?